Most men are focused on the wrong thing entirely. They think it's about age. They think it's inevitable. They think that after a certain point, the body just starts letting them down, and there's not much they can do about it. But here's what researchers are now beginning to understand more clearly. Age itself is rarely the main driver. What's actually happening is something different, something more specific, something that once you understand it, starts to make a lot more sense. And one simple habit may influence this more than most men realize. So if you're over 40 and you've noticed changes in your energy, your confidence, your performance, stay with this, because what you're about to hear might completely shift the way you think about your body. Let's start with something honest. There's a moment most men recognize. You don't talk about it. You might not even fully acknowledge it to yourself. But it's there. It happens quietly. Maybe it's the first time things don't go the way you expected. Maybe it's a second time. And suddenly, there's this hesitation that wasn't there before. A kind of pressure that follows you, not just into the bedroom, but into the rest of your day. You start second-guessing yourself. You pull back a little. The confidence that used to come naturally starts to feel like something you have to work for. And the silence around this topic, that silence is loud, because most men around you are going through the same thing. But nobody's saying it. Nobody's talking about it, at work, or with friends, or even with their doctor most of the time. So you carry it alone, and that weight is heavier than people realize. If you felt that, even once, you're in the right place. Because this video isn't about embarrassment, it's about understanding. And understanding is where everything changes. Now here's where this becomes really interesting. When most men think about erectile dysfunction or just a decline in performance, they immediately jump to hormones. Specifically, testosterone. That's the conversation that dominates. Low T, hormone replacement, all of that. And testosterone does matter. We're not dismissing that. But what many experts are now observing, and what doesn't get nearly enough attention, is the role of blood flow. Specifically, what's happening inside your blood vessels. And even more specifically, a molecule that your body produces naturally that most men have never heard of. That molecule is called nitric oxide, and it might be one of the most important things in your body that nobody's talking about. Let me explain this simply, because it's worth understanding clearly. Your body has an enormous network of blood vessels, arteries, veins, capillaries, a system so vast that if you laid it all out end to end, it would stretch for tens of thousands of miles. And the health of that system depends heavily on the inner lining of those vessels. That lining is called the endothelium. It's essentially the control center of your vascular system. And one of its most critical jobs is producing nitric oxide. Think of nitric oxide as a signal. When your body needs more blood flow somewhere, muscles during exercise, the heart during stress, or other tissues during intimacy, nitric oxide sends the message to relax and widen the blood vessels. To open the gates, so to speak. When that signal is strong and consistent, blood moves efficiently. The body responds the way it's supposed to. But when nitric oxide production starts to decline, when the signal gets weaker, the vessels don't relax as easily. They become less responsive. Blood flow becomes less efficient. And that affects everything. Performance, energy, recovery, stamina, all of it. And here's something most men completely overlook. Nitric oxide production doesn't stay constant across your lifetime. Researchers have consistently observed that it tends to decrease with age, often significantly. Some estimates suggest that men in their 40s and 50s may be producing substantially less nitric oxide than they did in their 20s and 30s. And this isn't a sudden cliff, it's a gradual slope, which is actually part of why it's so easy to miss. It doesn't happen overnight, it happens slowly, month after month, year after year. Small shifts that you might attribute to stress or poor sleep or just getting older. And in the meantime, the underlying vascular changes continue, quietly, beneath the surface, often without any obvious warning sign until the effects become harder to ignore. That's the part most men never fully hear about. Not the hormone conversation, not the lifestyle conversation, but the vascular conversation, the circulation conversation, the conversation about what's actually happening inside the vessels that supply blood to every important system in your body. Now, let's talk about what contributes to this decline. Because it's not just age in isolation. There are specific factors that researchers believe accelerate this process, and understanding them is important. The modern diet is one of them. Decades ago, the average diet looked very different. More whole foods, more vegetables rich in naturally occurring compounds that support vascular health, less processed food, less industrial seed oil, less refined sugar. Today, most men, in their 40s and beyond, are eating in a way that doesn't give the body the raw materials it needs to maintain healthy nitric oxide levels. The endothelium, that inner lining of the blood vessels, depends on specific compounds to function well, and those compounds have largely disappeared from the typical American diet. Chronic stress is another factor. Elevated cortisol, the primary stress hormone, has been observed to interfere with nitric oxide production over time. And most men over 40 are carrying more chronic stress than their bodies are designed to manage consistently. Sedentary behavior matters too. Physical movement, particularly cardiovascular exercise, is one of the most powerful natural signals for nitric oxide production. When that movement is absent, when you're sitting most of the day, the body simply has less reason to maintain robust vascular function. And then there's sleep. Poor sleep quality, which becomes increasingly common in men after 40, has been linked to reduced nitric oxide availability and impaired vascular recovery. None of these are new ideas individually, but what researchers are now understanding more clearly is how they compound on each other. Each factor weakens the system slightly. Together, they create conditions where the vascular response, including the erectile response, becomes significantly less reliable. Here's where this becomes really interesting. Because the research isn't just identifying the problem, it's also pointing towards something more hopeful. Specifically, certain natural compounds, amino acids, and plant-based extracts have been studied for their ability to support nitric oxide production and vascular function. And the science on this is more developed than most people realize. Let's walk through a few of these, because understanding what they do helps you understand why they matter. The first is L-citrulline. This is an amino acid found naturally in certain foods. Watermelon is actually one of the richest sources, but in amounts that are difficult to obtain through diet alone. L-citrulline is interesting because it converts to another amino acid in the body, l-arginine. And l-arginine is one of the key precursors to nitric oxide production. What researchers have found is that L-citrulline may actually be more effective at raising l-arginine levels than taking l-arginine directly. This is because of how the body processes these compounds during digestion. L-citrulline survives the digestive process more effectively, which means more of it reaches the bloodstream, and more is available for conversion. Multiple studies have looked at L-citrulline supplementation in the context of vascular health and blood flow, and the findings have been encouraging enough that it's now a widely studied compound in the field of cardiovascular and sexual health research. And remember that vascular system we were talking about, that network of vessels that depends on clear, consistent signaling to function properly. L-arginine works directly within that system. It acts as the primary substrate, the raw material, that the endothelium uses to synthesize nitric oxide. Without sufficient L-arginine availability, nitric oxide production is limited, regardless of how healthy the rest of the system is. The challenge is that as men age, the enzyme responsible for this conversion, the one that turns L-arginine into nitric oxide, becomes less efficient. And this is part of why dietary sources alone often aren't enough. The body needs more than it can reasonably obtain from food, and it's less efficient at using what it gets. This is where targeted nutritional support starts to make real sense from a physiological standpoint. Now here's something that surprises a lot of men when they first learn about it. Panax ginseng, sometimes called Korean red ginseng, has been used in traditional medicine for centuries, but it's only in recent decades that modern research has begun to examine why it seems to have the effects it does. What researchers have found is that certain compounds within Panax ginseng, specifically a class called ginsenosides, appear to support nitric oxide synthesis in the endothelium. They seem to activate some of the same pathways that exercise activates. In other words, they support the body's own natural mechanisms rather than overriding them. Multiple controlled studies have examined Panax ginseng in the context of erectile function specifically. And while no supplement is a cure or a guarantee, the body of research here is significant enough that it's taken seriously in integrative medicine and men's health research. The pattern across these compounds, L-citrulline, L-arginine, Panax ginseng, is that they all work in the direction of supporting what the body is already trying to do. They're not forcing an unnatural response. They're providing the raw materials and signals that the body needs to function closer to its natural capacity. But this is the part most men never hear about. Even if you're aware of these compounds, getting meaningful amounts from food alone is genuinely difficult. Let's use L-citrulline as an example. Watermelon contains it, but you'd need to eat an enormous amount consistently every single day to approach the levels studied in research. And L-arginine is found in protein-rich foods like red meat, poultry, and nuts, but absorption decreases with age, and cooking can reduce bioavailability. The modern food supply presents another challenge. Soil depletion, processing methods, and long supply chains all reduce the nutrient density of the foods we eat compared to what they contained several decades ago. This isn't speculation. It's been documented in nutritional research going back more than 30 years. So the gap between what the body needs and what diet alone can provide is real, and it tends to grow wider with age, precisely when the body needs more support, not less. This is why many men who are serious about maintaining their health, men who eat reasonably well, exercise, and pay attention, are still finding that targeted supplementation makes a meaningful difference. Not because they're doing something wrong, but because the system is working against them in ways that aren't immediately obvious. And this changes everything when you start thinking about it from a long-term perspective. Because this isn't just about one area of performance. The same vascular system we've been discussing, the one that depends on healthy nitric oxide levels and clear, efficient blood flow, that system is responsible for far more than most men consider. Energy levels, mental clarity, cardiovascular function, physical stamina, recovery after exercise, circulation to the extremities, all of it is connected. When blood flow is compromised, when the signaling that keeps vessels healthy and responsive starts to weaken, the effects ripple outward. You notice it in the gym. You notice it in your energy at the end of the day. You notice it in the way you engage with the people closest to you. And over months, sometimes years, those small changes accumulate into something that feels like a different version of yourself. Less capable, less driven, less confident. Most men assume that's just aging. They accept it, they adjust. But what researchers are suggesting is that much of what men attribute to aging is actually a function of vascular health. And vascular health can be supported, it can be maintained. With the right approach, some of what's been lost can potentially be restored. That's not a promise, that's not a guarantee. It's what the research suggests when you look at the mechanisms honestly. Now here's what this means practically. Lifestyle is the foundation. That doesn't change. Exercise, particularly aerobic exercise, remains one of the most powerful tools for supporting nitric oxide production and vascular health. Even 30 minutes of moderate walking done consistently has measurable effects on endothelial function. Diet matters, sleep matters, stress management matters. These aren't optional, they're the base. But what many men are finding is that even with those foundations in place, targeted nutritional support can fill gaps that lifestyle alone can't fully address. Particularly after 40. Particularly given the realities of modern food quality, aging digestion, and the cumulative effects of chronic stress. The goal isn't to replace the body's own capacity, it's to support it, to give it what it needs to maintain healthy function as naturally as possible. That's a fundamentally different approach from reaching for a pharmaceutical solution as a first resort. It's not about forcing a result, it's about creating the conditions in which the body can do what it's naturally designed to do. For men who want to explore a natural way to support this process, the vascular health, the nitric oxide production, the circulation, there's a resource available in the description below. It outlines what to look for, what the research supports, and how men are approaching this from a nutritional standpoint. No pressure, just information, if you want it. Let's close with something that matters more than any of the biology we've covered today. You are not the version of yourself that's been struggling. You are not defined by the hesitation or the insecurity or the quiet frustration that's been building in the background. What's happening in your body is real. The changes are real. But they're also, in many cases, addressable when you understand what's actually driving them. The men who make the biggest shifts aren't necessarily the ones who do the most dramatic things. They're the ones who understand the system, who make consistent, intelligent choices, who stop accepting decline as inevitable and start treating their body like something worth investing in. Confidence isn't something you get back all at once. It comes back in small moments. The morning you wake up feeling like yourself again. The workout where you have energy left at the end. The intimacy that goes the way you hoped. The conversation where you speak without hesitation. Those moments build on each other, and they start with understanding, which is exactly what you've given yourself today by staying through this entire video. You are still that man. You just need to give your body what it needs to remind you. If you found this helpful, if this video gave you a new perspective on your health, Subscribe for daily content on men's mentality after 40. Drop a comment below. What's the one change you're gonna make first? And if you know a man who needs to hear this, share this video with him. It might be exactly what he's been looking for.